The Galactic Council's deep space scanners picked up a strange reading. Something massive, something unknown had entered the outer edges of Council-controlled space. At first, the technicians thought it was an error. No ship of that size should exist, at least none recorded in any database. But as the minutes passed, the signal remained steady and undeniable. The alert spread quickly. Defense forces in the nearby sectors were put on high alert. Patrol fleets rushed toward the unknown vessel, weapons charged but orders clear. Observe first, engage only if necessary. Admiral Vector of the Zorvathian fleet received the report aboard his command ship. He narrowed his reptilian eyes as he studied the holographic display. The unknown ship was enormous, larger than anything he had ever seen. It moved slowly but with precision, its trajectory leading directly toward the neutral zone, a region that separated the Council's core worlds from the unclaimed void. "What is this thing?" one of his officers muttered. Vector zoomed in on the readings. The energy output was staggering. Shield strength, weapon signatures. Everything about this vessel suggested advanced military technology far beyond anything in the Council's records. And yet, it bore no known markings, no familiar transponder codes. "Send a standard greeting," Vector ordered. "Identify ourselves and request their purpose." The transmission was sent. Silence followed. No response. Vector's tail twitched in irritation. "Send again." Still nothing. The fleet moved closer, careful but ready. As they approached visual range, the dark outline of the vessel became clearer. Its structure was angular, armored, built for war. Unlike most ships, which emitted soft glows from their engines and navigation lights, this ship was nearly black, a shadow in the void, absorbing the light around it. Then something happened that made every officer on Vector's bridge freeze. The ship turned, but not in a normal way. There was no visible thrust, no engine flare. It simply rotated unnaturally smooth, like some unseen force had adjusted its position in an instant. And then, its front aligned perfectly with the Council fleet. It was watching them. A shiver ran through the crew. One of the officers swallowed hard. "Sir, we're being scanned." Vector didn't need to be told. He could feel it. The weight of something ancient, something deliberate pressing against them. This was no ordinary ship. This was something that knew them. Then the ship finally responded. A single transmission. A voice, clear and steady, in flawless galactic standard. "We have returned." The bridge went silent. Vector felt a chill crawl up his spine. There was only one species in recorded history that had used that phrase. A species that had once been part of the galactic community, but had vanished long ago. Humans. The thought alone made his blood run cold. The last recorded encounter with humans had been centuries ago, in the Council's early days. They had been seen as primitive, unworthy of true recognition. The Council had ruled against them, pushed them aside, taken control of their star systems. And then, one day, they were simply gone. No one had ever figured out why. Some believed they had destroyed themselves. Others thought they had flown into the unknown. But now, looking at this impossible warship, Vector realized the truth. The humans hadn't been wiped out. They had been waiting. And now, they were back. The Zorvathian admiral clenched his fists. "All ships, hold position. Do not engage." His officers hesitated. Some of them looked ready to panic. Others whispered nervously among themselves. But no one argued. They could all sense it. This was not just another ship. This was a warning. And the entire galaxy was about to learn what it meant. The warship remained motionless in the void, a silent predator observing its prey. Across the Council fleet, officers and admirals exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do next. Vector's scaled fingers curled into a tight fist as he stared at the display. The humans had been gone for centuries. Erased, forgotten, dismissed as a minor species that had failed to keep up with the Galactic Council's expansion. And yet, here they were, Not just surviving but returning with technology beyond anything the Council had ever imagined. His mind raced with possibilities. Were they alone? Was this a single rogue vessel, or had humanity rebuilt in the shadows, growing in strength while the rest of the galaxy had remained blind to their existence? His gut told him the answer was far worse than anyone dared to consider. The voice from the human ship still echoed in his mind. Cold, calculated, certain. "We have returned." It was not a request. It was not a plea. It was a declaration. One of his officers, a younger Zorvathian with bright yellow eyes, swallowed hard before speaking. "Admiral, what are your orders?" Vector hesitated for only a second. "We wait," he said. "We do not provoke them." His words were met with uneasy silence, but no one dared to argue. The Council had ruled the stars for centuries, but something about this ship, about its presence, made even the bravest warriors hesitate. Then, without warning, the human ship moved. Not in an aggressive way, but with purpose. It began a slow advance, gliding toward the Council fleet with eerie precision. The display flickered with incoming data, shield outputs increasing, energy levels spiking. The humans were preparing for something. "Sir," one of the technicians shouted. "They're transmitting again." Vector straightened. "Put it through." The same voice returned, but this time there was something more in the tone, an edge of finality. "Your time is over." The transmission cut, and in that instant, alarms blared across the fleet. Sensors detected massive gravitational fluctuations. Before anyone could react, the space around the human warship shifted. One moment, it was alone. The next, more ships emerged from the void. Gigantic, black warships, each one as monstrous as the first, phasing into real space as if stepping from the shadows. Not one, not two, hundreds. The bridge of Vector's command ship fell into chaos. Officers scrambled, shouting over one another. Fear spread like wildfire. No one had seen this coming. No one had even imagined it was possible. The Council had always assumed the humans had been erased from history, but the truth was far more terrifying. They had been waiting. They had been building. And now they had returned, not as refugees, not as survivors, but as conquerors. The silence of the void was shattered by the sheer presence of the newly arrived human fleet. Hundreds of warships, each a behemoth of terrifying power, now filled the space around the Council's forces. Their hulls were dark as midnight, absorbing the distant starlight, and their weapons pulsed with unreadable energy signatures. It was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever seen before. Panic rippled through the alien ranks as officers shouted across communication channels, demanding information, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. The Council's fleets were vast, powerful, and had ruled the stars unchallenged for centuries. Yet, in the face of these monstrous vessels, their confidence wavered. These weren't the humans they had banished long ago. These were something else entirely, something evolved, something prepared. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Vector felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping up his spine. Fear. He had faced countless battles, crushed rebellions, led fleets into war, but never had he seen such overwhelming force appear without warning. His claws tapped against the control panel, struggling to maintain composure. How had they done this? Where had they hidden? And why now, after all these years, had they chosen to return? He knew one thing for certain. This was no coincidence. The humans had waited for the right moment. They had planned this. And now the trap was closing. A cold voice echoed through the Council's communication channels. "This is Supreme Commander Elias Voss of the Terran Dominion. The Galactic Council's reign ends today." The declaration hit like a physical blow. The name, Terran Dominion, was unfamiliar, but the authority in Voss's voice left no room for doubt. This was not a plea for negotiation, not an introduction. It was an ultimatum. Vector's mind raced. There had always been whispers, old stories from the Council archives about the human exiles. They had been cast out, their homeworld supposedly stripped of its strength, left to wither in isolation. But now it was clear, humanity had never died. It had simply been waiting in the darkness, growing into something far worse than anyone had imagined. "Admiral, what do we do?" One of his officers stammered, voice barely above a whisper. The Council's forces were outnumbered, outgunned, outmatched. Every scan of the human ships revealed technology that should have been impossible. Plasma cannons with power readings off the charts, shield harmonics that adjusted in real time, engine drives that seemed to distort the very fabric of space itself. These weren't warships built to intimidate. They were built to annihilate. Vector had always believed the Council's fleets were unmatched, that their control over the galaxy was unshakable. But now he understood the truth. The humans hadn't just caught up. They had surpassed them, and they were done hiding. Then came the final chilling message. "You exiled us," Voss's voice continued, unwavering. "You left us to die. But we survived. We endured. And now we return to claim what is ours." The transmission ended, and for a moment, a deadly quiet settled over the battlefield. Then, as if the void itself had taken a breath, the human fleet moved. Like predators descending on helpless prey, the warships advanced, their weapons glowing like the eyes of vengeful gods. The Council fleet barely had time to react before the first blast tore through the silence, and the war for the galaxy began. The battlefield was a storm of fire and destruction. The Galactic Council's once mighty fleet, the so-called enforcers of peace and order, were now reduced to panicked voices screaming across dying communication channels. Human warships moved with terrifying precision, their massive forms gliding through the void like specters of vengeance. Plasma cannons roared to life, unleashing blue-white streams of energy that tore through alien hulls as if they were made of paper. Shields flickered, engines exploded, and escape pods scattered like insects fleeing a collapsing nest. The Council had never faced an enemy like this, not just in power, but in sheer, calculated ferocity. They had fought wars, yes, but they had never fought for survival. Humanity had, and it showed. Admiral Vector clenched his claws against his command console, watching in horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled. Every defensive maneuver, every counterattack, was anticipated, countered, destroyed. The humans didn't just fire wildly. They hunted. They moved in coordinated packs, isolating enemy ships, cutting off escape routes, and executing precise, brutal strikes. It was as if they had practiced this exact scenario for decades, and perhaps they had. One of his officers, a trembling Selenary, turned toward him, eyes wide with fear. "Admiral, we must retreat. We cannot stand against them." The alien's voice was nearly a whimper, breaking under the weight of realization. Vector wanted to deny it, wanted to believe that the Council's might would prevail, that there was still some trick, some desperate maneuver that could turn the tide. But deep down, he knew the truth. They had already lost. A fresh explosion lit up the screen as another Council battleship was torn in half, its burning wreckage tumbling into the void. Vector felt a pang of something he hadn't experienced in centuries: powerlessness. The Council had spent generations ensuring their supremacy, enforcing their rule with unwavering authority. They had controlled the flow of resources, dictated the rise and fall of civilizations. And yet, they had overlooked one simple, fatal truth. Humanity had never needed their approval to survive. And now, they had returned, not as desperate exiles begging for mercy, but as conquerors ready to reclaim their place among the stars. The Council's fleet continued to disintegrate, ship by ship. The humans showed no hesitation, no mercy. They fired with absolute intent. Each shot was not just an act of war, it was a message, a reminder that the mistakes of the past had consequences, and the Council's sins would not be forgotten. Then, amidst the chaos, the main communication channel opened. And there, on the massive screen of Vector's flagship, the face of Supreme Commander Elias Voss appeared. His expression was unreadable, cold, unyielding, as if carved from stone. His dark eyes seemed to pierce through the distance, as if he could see directly into the souls of those who had once cast his people aside. "Admiral Vector," Voss said, his voice steady, devoid of emotion. "Surrender or burn." The words struck like a hammer against stone. There was no arrogance, no gloating, just the certainty of victory. The humans had planned this moment, prepared for it, waited for it. And now, they had delivered their ultimatum. Vector's breath came shallow and ragged. His mind raced through the possibilities, searching for an outcome that did not end in ruin. But the only answer, the only truth, was the one he had refused to acknowledge since the moment those warships appeared. The council was finished. He turned to his officers, their faces stricken with terror, their eyes filled with the knowledge that they were not the superior force anymore. The balance of power had shattered, and humanity now stood above them. Vector's claws trembled as he reached for the control panel. His pride screamed at him to resist, to fight to the last breath. But he knew what would happen if he did. The humans would not hesitate. With a heavy, defeated sigh, he sent the only message that could save what remained of his fleet. "This is Admiral Vector of the Galactic Council. We surrender." For the first time in history, the Council bowed before humanity. The moment the surrender message was sent, an eerie silence fell over the battlefield. No more plasma fire, no more dying screams over the comms, just the cold, endless void of space, littered with the wreckage of what had once been the Galactic Council's proud fleet. The surviving Council ships drifted in place, their weapons powered down, shields failing, and crews too terrified to make a move. They had seen what happened to those who resisted. The humans did not offer second chances. Aboard the HSS Vengeance, Supreme Commander Elias Voss leaned back in his command chair, watching the transmission from Admiral Vector play out on the screen. The once arrogant council leader now looked small, his once proud voice filled with exhaustion and fear. "We surrender." Two words that changed everything. A low murmur swept through the human command deck. Officers exchanged glances, some in satisfaction, others in disbelief. For decades, humanity had been treated as lesser beings, forced into exile, cast away like unwanted trash. And now, here they were, standing over the shattered remains of the Council's might, with vengeance in their grasp. Voss exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. The rage that had driven humanity to this moment burned in his veins, but he could not afford to let it consume him. Victory was theirs. Now came the reckoning. He turned to his second-in-command, Commander Lin Zhao, whose sharp gaze was locked on the screen. "Confirm their weapons are offline," Voss ordered. "Aye, sir," Lin replied, running a quick scan. "No energy signatures detected. They're completely disabled." Voss nodded, then turned back to the screen. "Admiral Vector," he said, his voice calm but unforgiving, "your surrender is accepted. Power down all remaining ships and prepare to be boarded." The alien leader hesitated, his mandibles clicking nervously. We request safe passage back to Council space," he stammered. "We will leave. You have won. There is no need for further bloodshed." Voss's expression darkened. "You think this is about winning." His voice was quiet, but it carried a dangerous edge. "You exiled us. You stripped us of our worlds, left us to die in the void. And now, after all these years, you expect to simply walk away." Vector swallowed hard. We made mistakes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "We misjudged humanity's potential. We did not realize." "You didn't realize we would survive." Voss leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto the trembling alien. "You thought we'd vanish. You thought you'd never have to face us again." He let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "Now you will face the consequences." A deathly silence followed. Then, Commander Lin Zhao broke it. "Sir, should we begin deployment?" Voss considered for a moment. They could annihilate the remaining Council forces, erase them from existence. It would be justice, wouldn't it? An eye for an eye. But no, humanity had already proven its strength. Now, they had the chance to prove something even greater. He turned back to the screen. You will surrender your fleet, your command codes, and every Council outpost under your control, Voss stated. Humanity will decide what happens next. Vector's shoulders slumped. He knew there was no bargaining, no escape. Understood, he muttered. Voss gave a curt nod. Then let this be the moment the galaxy remembers. His eyes burned with the weight of history. Humanity is back, and we are here to stay. The Galactic Council's surviving commanders were rounded up and escorted aboard the HSS Vengeance under the watchful eyes of human soldiers. Their wrists were bound in energy cuffs, their once pristine uniforms now tattered, stained with sweat and fear. For years, they had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, believing themselves untouchable. But now, they stood on the warship of those they had abandoned, at the mercy of the very species they had sought to erase. The command chamber was silent as Supreme Commander Elias Voss entered, his heavy boots echoing against the metal floor. His cold gaze swept across the trembling council members. They were high-ranking officials, admirals, strategists, the architects of humanity's exile. And now, they were nothing more than prisoners. Voss stepped forward, stopping inches away from Admiral Vector, the one who had spoken for the Council, the one who had sent the final order that banished humanity to the fringes of space. Vector's usually gleaming exoskeleton was dulled with dust and sweat, his mandibles twitching with anxiety. "You look nervous, Admiral," Voss said, his voice calm, but sharp as a blade. Vector swallowed hard. "We acknowledge our defeat," he stammered. "But I urge you to consider diplomacy. Humanity has already proven its might. There is no need for further violence." A low chuckle rippled through the human officers standing around the room. Diplomacy. Now, after everything. Voss tilted his head slightly. "You speak of diplomacy now, but where was your diplomacy when you exiled us? When you left our people to rot in the void?" His tone remained even, but his words were laced with steel. "Did you offer humanity a chance to negotiate when you stripped us of our worlds?" Vector lowered his gaze. We did what we thought was best for the balance of the galaxy." "The balance of the galaxy?" Voss's voice turned cold. "You mean your control over it?" He leaned in, his expression hard. "You feared us. You feared what humanity could become. And now, your worst fear has come true." The room fell silent. The council members shifted uncomfortably, but none dared to speak. Voss straightened. "I should execute every single one of you," he stated, his tone flat, unshaken. "No one would blame me. No one would miss you. Your own fleets have abandoned you. Your empire is in ruins. Humanity has won." Vector trembled, his mandibles clicking rapidly. The other council members looked equally stricken. But Voss continued, his gaze darkening. "Humanity is not like you. We do not slaughter for convenience. We do not erase entire civilizations just because they threaten our power. That is what you do." He took a step back, looking at them like they were insects beneath his boot. "We will decide your fate, but it will not be on your terms. You no longer hold power in this galaxy." The weight of his words settled over them like a crushing force. They had not only lost a war, they had lost everything. Their rule, their status, their very place in history had been shattered. The galaxy would no longer see them as the mighty rulers of the stars. They would be remembered as the ones who fell before humanity. Voss turned to Commander Lin Zhao. "Take them to the holding cells. Keep them alive. For now." Lin nodded, barking an order to the guards. The council members were dragged away, some too shocked to resist, others whispering desperate pleas that fell on deaf ears. As the doors slid shut behind them, Voss let out a slow breath. The war was over. The council was defeated, but humanity's true fight was just beginning. They had reclaimed their place in the stars. Now, they would reshape the galaxy itself. The galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had returned, not as the weak, exiled species the Council had cast out, but as a force that had shaken the very foundations of the universe. The war was over. The Council was defeated, their fleets destroyed, their power shattered. But victory was not the end. It was only the beginning. Standing on the bridge of the HSS Vengeance, Supreme Commander Elias Voss gazed out at the void. Wreckage from the battle still drifted through space, the shattered remains of once mighty alien warships. Fires burned on the husks of fallen capital ships, casting an eerie glow against the darkness. Humanity had won, but now came the question that every soldier aboard the Vengeance was silently asking. What happens next? The Galactic Council was finished, but the galaxy itself was still in chaos. With the Council's rule collapsed, hundreds of worlds were now leaderless, vulnerable to pirates, warlords, and opportunistic species eager to seize power. If left unchecked, the galaxy would descend into lawless anarchy. Voss turned to his officers. Commander Lin Zhao, Admiral Carter Hayes, and Intelligence Director Seraphine Vale stood at attention, awaiting his command. Humanity had been forced into exile once, but now they had returned, and the galaxy would not be allowed to fall into disorder. The Council is gone, Voss said, his voice firm. Their empire is in ruins, but the galaxy still needs order. His eyes swept across his officers. It will not be the same order as before. We will not rule through fear, through oppression, through deception, like they did. He exhaled slowly, but make no mistake. We will ensure that no species, ever again, dares to exile humanity. Commander Lin Zhao nodded. We have the firepower. We have the fleets. But what about the other species? Will they accept us? Voss smiled slightly. They have no choice. They will accept us, or they will be left behind. The officers exchanged glances. This was not just a military victory. It was the beginning of something far greater. Humanity had come back from the void with a fleet unlike any the galaxy had seen. The HSS Vengeance was just the first of many. They were no longer outcasts. They were the new power. Voss turned back toward the vast expanse of space. Set a course, he ordered. We begin our first mission, to bring balance to a broken galaxy. The engines of the HSS Vengeance roared to life, and with a final burst of light, humanity's warship vanished into the void, ready to forge a new future.